Good morning and welcome to worship here at First Parish in Framingham. I'm the Reverend Aaron Stockwell, Senior Minister, and it is an honor and a joy to be with you and to serve in this role. At First Parish in Framingham, it doesn't matter your age, your race, your ethnicity, how you move around in the world, or who you love. What matters is that you are here, a part of this beloved community. Thank you to all of those who are making this service possible. Folks serving in tech roles as ushers here and online. Thank you to Diane Bassett for decorating the chancel in honor of Larry and Patricia Bassett's 60th anniversary. Congratulations, Larry and Pat. Doesn't matter whether you are here in the sanctuary attending. It doesn't matter if you're one of the 23 participants on Zoom, the untold numbers watching on our live stream or watching the service later. Thank you for setting aside some time to center yourself, to ground yourself, and to be here now. First Parish in Framingham has been gathering together since 1701. It is a congregation that has lasted because of the people that make it up. So welcome to First Parish in Framingham. We begin our service, as we always do, by lighting a chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. These words are a global chalice lighting originally shared by the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists, originally written in Portuguese by the Unitarian community of Rio de Janeiro. We are a global faith. These words. We light this flame as a reminder of our mission of being a light of the world. In unity with those who came before us, with whom we are a spiritual community, we shall be able to commit to the building of a community of free faith beyond geographical limits and personal beliefs. May we be a shelter to those who need it the most. Our opening hymn is "Here We Have Gathered."
Here we have Lanterns of hope and faith arise, then His word will on earth make strong, through every and by every tongue.
Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to serve life with compassion, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. This is our great covenant, one with another and with our God. Our time for all ages this morning starts in a familiar way. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far, far away, there lived a mighty shogun warrior in Japan. And he had a favorite tea bowl from which he took his tea in a ceremony every day. Well, one fateful day, as he was sipping from his bowl, it fell from his grasp and shattered on the floor into even pieces. He was devastated, for it was, in fact, his favorite bowl. And so he sent it away for repair. And when it came back, it was, once again, in a whole piece, ready to be used. But it was held together with unsightly metal staples. Not very attractive. Not something he wanted to take his tea from every day. So he turned to a craftsman, and he challenged him and said, "Take this bowl and make it beautiful once again, for it is my favorite bowl." Now, the craftsman, who is in fact the hero of our story here, he wanted to try something new. He wanted to both repair and beautify the bowl. So he set to work removing the ugly metal staples and mixed together lacquer, a resin, to hold the pieces together. But before he glued them back into one piece, he mixed in powdered gold. And in doing so, put each piece together, one piece at a time, until veins of gold ran through the bowl. He returned it to the great warrior, a little afraid, a little trepidatious. Would this, in fact, do the job? And the warrior was so very, very pleased. Each crack of streak gold through his piece became something beautiful, became a part of the story of the bowl, for the bowl had history too. This art form became known as kintsugi, or golden joinery, roughly translated. The value of the object is in its story, in its history. The cracks are all the more made beautiful. I am kintsugi, and perhaps you are too, as you repair the things that are broken in your life. How can we go about starting perhaps with just the unsightly staples to make it useful again, but over time coming back into those cracks, back into the broken places, and adding beauty? For you, though you may be broken, are beautiful.
We now come to the time in the service that we set aside for sharing of the milestones, the joys and the sorrows, because we know that joy shared can be joy expanded, and sorrow shared can feel as though someone is lifting a burden. Many joys today. A joy from Diane, who writes that she is honoring her parents, Pat and Larry, on the occasion of their 60th wedding anniversary this week. Loving over the long term is complex and wonderful and so worth it. I am grateful that they have shown the way. A joy from Lauren F., who writes, I am joyful at the prospect of a black woman on the Supreme Court. This from Ellen P., who writes that my rabbit Smoochie is featured in the House Rabbit Society Journal. It is a non-profit Rabbit Rescue and Education Organization. You can see photos of Smoochie at rabbit.org. From Valerie W., who writes, "My daughter and our 2 grandsons who live in Uruguay are visiting us. We have not seen them in 2 years due to the pandemic. We are happy to be together again." Because sometimes joy and sorrow can be confusing to figure out. From Jim H., who writes, "COVID has finally made its way to our house. So far, thanks to being vaccinated and or young and healthy, it's not causing serious illness." These sorrows as well in our congregation and community. Mary Rose writes that my sister Margaret's cancer has spread and she is now in hospice. And from Lee K., who writes, "I'd like to ask us to hold the Groton, Massachusetts family of Cassidy Baraka in prayer. Cassidy was 7 when she lost her life to COVID recently. Her funeral is today, Sunday, and Aaliyah Kemmler, the minister at First Parish in Groton, and I will be co-officiating." And we light one final candle for the joys and the sorrows that remain unshared and unspoken. Let us now take a moment to turn into a space of further contemplation or meditation, or perhaps prayer, centering ourselves in the ways that we know best. Whether that's noticing the chair that is supporting us, planting our feet on the ground, or just paying attention to our breath in and our breath out. O Spirit of love and life, known by many names, but who knows the name that we were called before we had a name, which is beloved. I give thanks for this people of joy, for relationships long lasting, for new possibility, for friends and family, in the sight of recognition. We have much to be thankful for, and we know that it did not have to be this way. We also hold in our hearts all those who are ill, especially those from COVID, in our tender community. We remember those who are healing, those who are mourning, those who live with addiction. May we find ways to reach out and be love's hands in the world. We know, too, that though this world is beautiful, it is also broken. There's oppression in so many insidious forms, places that could use more justice. May we work to bend the arc of the universe towards justice. This work does not happen alone. It does not happen over short periods of time. It takes constant pressure. May we have persistence and resilience to do this work. And because we are human, we slip up and trip up. We make mistakes. We put distance between ourselves, others, and whatever name we use for that which is beyond, may we remember that there is always time to move back into right relationship. It can begin by saying, I'm sorry. Can be brought back into that relationship by saying, what can I do better? I say these words and do all things for love's sake. May it be so. Let us now enter into a time of deeper contemplation. We'll sit in the quiet of this old house for 1 minute so that we might listen, rest, pray the prayers of our own hearts, or simply do nothing. You have permission to do nothing for 1 whole minute. May it be so, and amen.
This morning, we each arrived to worship together via our own unique paths. Some traveled a great distance and braved the elements to fill the pews. Others poured a cup of tea and settled into a favorite chair at home. Whatever the route you journeyed to join us today, the strength of the First Parish community has called you to this place. And whether it is your first visit or you've been around for decades, you have much to offer through your presence. It takes all sorts of contributions to maintain our vibrant church community, and we each must do our part. We can contribute in all sorts of meaningful ways with our time, treasure, and talent. Every time we give of ourselves, we empower First Parish to continue to foster the liberal religious community that holds us all together. We each play a role in calling one another back to our church home. In this spirit of interdependence and generosity, we gratefully accept the offering. The collection plates are positioned at the end of the aisle here in the sanctuary, and those worshiping at home can visit uuframingham.org and click on the Give Now link. Thank you for your generosity. And now, our reading this morning is a poem by Barbara Kingsolver entitled Hope, an Owner's Manual, and I'm going to read it through 2 times for you this morning. Look, you might as well know this thing is going to take endless repair. Rubber bands, crazy glue, tapioca, the square of the hypotenuse, 19th century novels, heartstrings, sunrise, all of these are useful. Also, feathers. To keep it humming, Sometimes you have to stand on an incline where everything looks possible, on the line you drew yourself. Or in the grocery line, making faces at a toddler secretly over his mother's shoulder. You might have to pop the clutch and run past all the evidence, past everyone who is laughing or praying for you. Definitely you don't want to go directly to jail, but still, here you go, passing time, passing strange. Don't pass this up. In the worst of times, you will have to pass it off, park it, and fly by the seat of your pants. With nothing in the bank, you'll still want to take the express. Tiptoe past the dogs of the apocalypse that are sleeping in the shade of your future. Pay at the window. Pass your hope like a bad check. You might still have just enough time to make a deposit. One more time. Hope, an owner's manual. Look, you might as well know this thing is going to take endless repair. Rubber bands, crazy glue, tapioca, the square of the hypotenuse, 19th century novels, heartstrings, sunrise, all of these are useful. Also, feathers. To keep it humming, sometimes you have to stand on an incline where everything looks possible, on the line you drew yourself. Or in the grocery line, making faces at a toddler secretly over his mother's shoulder. You might have to pop the clutch and run past all the evidence, past everyone who is laughing or praying for you. Definitely you don't want to go directly to jail, but still, here you go, passing time, passing strange. Don't pass this up. In the worst of times, you will have to pass it off, park it, and fly by the seat of your pants. With nothing in the bank, you'll still want to take the express. Tiptoe past the dogs of the apocalypse that are sleeping in the shade of your future. Pay at the window. Pass your hope like a bad check. You might still have just enough time to make a deposit.
The House for Hope needs wallpaper on the walls. It needs music in its halls. It needs the smell of bread wafting. It needs music and flowers on the table. I wonder, what is the place of beauty in this heady world? I realize what is beautiful to me might be ugly or tacky to you. Our tastes change over time, dependent on where and when we live. Nana's shag carpeting, your uncle's mid-century modern font, a sans serif font. In vogue one moment, déclassé and dated the next. Beauty is challenging, especially when someone else told you what was beautiful. But I want to know what brings you joy, because that too is an expression of your values. Yes, the House for Hope needs wallpaper on the walls. It needs music in its halls. It needs the smell of bread baking wafting. It needs music and flowers on the table. The house for hope needs to feel lived into, not just dreamed about. That poem that I just read kind of wrote itself as I was walking my dog around the block. The whole thing just kind of poured out on the page, the source of creation through my hands onto the yellow legal pad page. I know because I wrote it, it came out of reading theology books and wondering where is the place of hope and joy and beauty. The name House for Hope is a riff off of a now 12-year-old book. The Unitarian Universalist theologians Rebecca Parker and John Burens wrote a book called A House for Hope, The Promise of Progressive Religion. It is the textbook, or at least the introductory text, to this thing that we call systematic theology. Systematic theology is, well, a systematic study of theology, usually breaking theology into smaller buckets, which are used to hold bigger questions. What is the nature of God? What is the nature of Jesus, of sin, of hell, of church, of humanity, of the end times, and of the Spirit? As you might be able to guess, the name House for Hope is an allusion to an extended metaphor that the authors use of the house to explore systematic theology. And it's a good book. If you have some spare time, read it. It doesn't have any footnotes. It's meant for everyone to read. And I've been using these buckets of questions throughout this year's winter or semester exploration of systematic theology in my sermons. And as I read the work, I read the metaphors that talk about the importance of work that people like my father and grandfather did with building frames and wiring houses. I see my family in that work. But I also come from a family of florists, of painters, of drapery makers. And as I read it, I wonder, where does that side of my family, where does their work fit into this project of systematic theology? Indeed, when it comes to the aesthetics of a space, I realize that everything is designed into a building where a space teaches something about the values of the client and also of the builder. Where do we have space for beauty? Where is the space for art and the things which move us? I think it is still there, but I don't think it fits easily into a section of systematic theology. There's a field of theology called poetic theology, which, I'll be honest, every time I start to read about poetic theology, it's like usually just out of grasp, like I could touch that part of the balcony, but then it slips away. This is the place where we insert art and poetry and beauty into theology. And so it remains just out of my grasp. Or I dive in so deep that I'm like the fish in a story told by David Foster Wallace, especially mentioned in his Kenyon College commencement address many years ago. The basic premise of this story is this. There are two fish just floating along in the ocean, having a grand old time, chatting with one another. And soon an older fish swims by, turns to the younger fish, says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two younger fish say, "Good morning," politely. And once the older fish is out of sight, the two younger fish turn to one another and they both ask, "What the heck is water?" Maybe this is the work of theology, to elevate the ordinary into the beautiful, to simply notice the everyday and say, yes, would you look at that? Wow. To dive in deeper into the place of art and religion, or rather the overlapping territory in that Venn diagram, we look to the work of von Ogden Vogt, who was a Unitarian theologian from the first half of the 20th century. In his book, Art and Religion, in the prologue to the second edition, he writes, "Today there are innumerable people outside the church who seek to serve the highest ideals of religion, but are disbarred from religious fellowship because they cannot define the ultimate in terms of traditional terms. The solution for this tragic division is simple. It is to simply abandon the centrality of beliefs and adopt the primacy of worship." Which I think, to take it to the next step, is where art enters in, where beauty enters in. He highlights that at his church they celebrated a Vocation Day service for many years. I mentioned this in my first sermon that I preached here in 2020. In those services, he often advertised with the trade unions in Chicago, where he ministered, having services that focused around merchandisers and those who work in retail, teachers, factory workers, bakers, printers, railroad workers, and so on. And it's not clear how long he officiated at those services or whether they continued after his ministry ended, but his reason for these services was to, quote, "help harmonize religious culture with the huge world of mass production industry. This is for the church to recognize and celebrate the dignity of humanity in their vocations." Now, in Vogt's day, he believed that the great change over the last 40 years in religious arts was church architecture. The second edition of Art and Religion was released in 1960, so the 40 years he refers to is 1920 to 1960. Indeed, architecture speaks louder than our words ever could. It is clear in a space such as ours that the sermon has been elevated to a high status. I'll say that this makes the act of preparing the sermon, imposing as the furniture is in this space, and the act of sermonic delivery a moment of rising emotion, literally, if not figuratively, with the preacher rising above the congregation. I believe that the architecture continues to shift in our religious spaces, and this is something that is rather easy to study. You get a sense of it just by opening the doors and peering inside of any house of worship. You can see and take a guess at, what does this congregation value? If we had to update the work of Vogt, what has changed about our worship and our corporate gathering together? From 1960 until 2022, yes, that is 62 years, the entire history of our denomination so far. We could look at a body of ordained clergy that is now a slim majority of women, and that no doubt has shifted how we do worship. A body of ordained clergy that include out gay, lesbian, transgender, and genderqueer people. This no doubt too has shifted our worship. A denomination that recognizes it has a long way to go to bringing the faces and life stories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color into our congregations, and also their voices into our pulpit. But we're working on that. In the early days of the merger of our denomination, you could also look at experiments in worship. There was the experimental nature of the Charles Street Meeting House in Boston, which featured colored lights that would flash and be used much like a theater would to create the mood. There were brass cast symbols along the arch in the front of the sanctuary of all of the world's religions, and on further study, some that appear just to be made up by the minister. The worship space of that congregation then had front and center, no cross, no chalice, but instead a giant image of the Andromeda Galaxy, front and center in the chancel. We also look too at how music has shifted. Liturgical dance has been used. You have the opportunity each Sunday to get creative and decorate the chancel in some creative fashion. And this has all shifted our worship. But I think that one of the largest shifts has been away from using strictly Scripture to inspire and inform our sermons. It is a subtle shift, but a very noteworthy one. We didn't always have poetry as a reading, or the chance and opportunity to use non-scriptural sources to inform the sermon. And this allows us to bring more voices, more experiences to our worship service. With no set lectionary used by preachers, it creates some bit of uniqueness, which is beautiful, but also mostly up to the whims of the preacher and their tastes in poetry, further complicated by the fact that sometimes deep and meaningful poems can't be used in worship because there are certain poems that are better read and heard and others that are better read and studied on the page. When it comes to our faith's sources, I've often wondered if we preach from poetry more and more, where does that fit in? The sources which you can read online or in the front of a hymnal if you have one at home. If it is our first source, then that is the recording of someone else's direct experience of mystery and wonder. With all of this, I go back to the question, what is the place in the house of hope for jazz music, for film, for draperies, and for beauty? I think part of this is our creative impulse that says, in the face of despair, which you may no doubt be feeling, where I could choose destruction, I could choose to do nothing, I have instead chose to create something. It could be new life, it could be art, it could be as temporary as a floral arrangement or the next meal. I cannot stress that enough. You do not have to be creating something for publication or to be shown in the galleries of the Danforth or perform at Symphony Hall, though that is wonderful if you are doing that, because if you are, you inspire us. But your notebook, your kitchen table, your living room is enough of a gallery. Henry Nelson Wyman wrote about the fact that baseball is what we know baseball as baseball is because of the people playing in the big leagues, but the sport is made and reinvented by kids playing in the sandlots. Very few bedroom guitarists will ever get to play a rock concert, but that doesn't stop them from trying, from continuing to play. Over my last study leave, I immersed myself in reading about contemplative writing and sacred reading. I also spent time at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and the Worcester Art Museum. And while my time in those museums was short, I wanted to encounter some art in a slow and deep way. I sat in front of 3 paintings that now I couldn't tell you what they were, but I remember the shapes. I remember noticing, too, how my mind wandered. I wanted to sit in front of these pieces of art, partially to honor the fact that the artist, even in spite of everything going on in their lives, said, "I have created." They say, I think it was either David Bumba or Frank Schulman, who said that the hymn isn't meant to be sung just once. It is meant to be sung for the 1,000th time. To wander quickly through the galleries seems to not honor the fact that an artist spent days, months, hours, or even years on a painting. That a poet represents not the moment that a poet records, or the moment in which the poet creates, but also the years of development. So why shouldn't we linger? Why shouldn't we let the song play on repeat for hours? Every now and then, as we did today, we listened to our poetic reading twice. If we have to understand that art and beauty is a necessity, and if we understand the necessity of being radically present to it by encountering it intentionally, how does our encounter of art encourage us to live differently? When we notice the beauty in the ordinary, we realize that hope is not a sure thing. It's barely held together, as Barbara Kingsolver writes in her poem, Hope, an Instruction Manual. When we notice the beauty and the hope in the ordinary, we realize that we are able to change hope. It needs us to go on. And what we observe changes us, and we also change what we observe. Hope seems to be a used car or an old car that you really need to use to get from point A to point B, but you worry, will it make it this far? It always has, but you never know when your luck is going to run out. And so, my friends gathered here, there is creativity out in the world. It is beautiful. It helps us to become radically present to all that is and all that could be. And it reminds us of the imperfection present in the world as well. May we have moments in our next few days to slow down and notice something new. May it be so, and amen. I send you forth with these words. O Spirit of life and love, this thing called hope can feel like it is broken down on the side of the road, and it can feel like we might not get very far. Awaken in us creativity and a love for beauty and grit. Awaken in us the spirit of slow repair so that we can get hope going again. If we're breathing, we still have enough time. Strengthen us so that we might gladden others in the days to come. Go in joy, beauty, love, and peace.